Yeah, Corla. I don't normally get engaged in some of what goes for combative discussion or debate across the chamber here, but I am somewhat amused, and if I was to summarise it, it would be something like this. They said it couldn't be done, and now they're saying it shouldn't have been done. I think that about summarises the opinion of the opposition. First of all, we were told in the likely event that we weren't going to get a deal on the promissory note, we had to take actions X, Y and Z. Now that all of the things that they said weren't going to be achieved, we now have secured. And I've heard Germany mentioned and Germany's bond debt. But we should remember that when Germany secured its loans internationally on 2 occasions in the 20th century, their economy was on its knees. And because of the structure of those loans, they were able to grow their economy to such an extent that they are now, the biggest economy in Europe, probably the 3rd biggest in the world, biggest exporter in Europe. And during that time, they had to spend 10 years absorbing the impact of the reunification of the country when they took the East German mark on a one-for-one basis and still managed to come out the other side because their debt was structured in such a way that allowed them to do it and grow their economy in such a dramatic fashion. And they've learnt their lessons from all of that, I would suggest, and that's what we need to do. But for anyone to say that the best outcome would have been to default, they say a write-down was the same thing, and yet know full well that they were able to say that within the comfort zone of knowing that they'd never have to that would never happen, and we'd never have to live by the consequences of that action. Because I honestly believe at the stage that we're at, and we only have to look at market response, and I don't mean sentiment, because as everybody said, the market has no sentiment, but it does measure everything when it decides whether or not this country, and it will be bond market investors, will finance this country as it does most other countries when we exit the programme that we're in at the moment, hopefully at the end of the year. So being mindful of that, I think it was a folly for some people to wait for the weekend to devise a new plan to come up to counter what had been a significant achievement. I mean, it is amazing. And then to have the audacity to come in here today and say, because the guillotine had been lifted, that they wanted more time to speak because they're the only people who have an opinion or an authority to speak on it. It really would gall you, Count Corla. And I don't get annoyed too often, but I listened to it here this morning. And I have to say I found it quite patronising to hear some people stand up. And I'm talking about my colleague, and I'm not going to get personal about it. But the rest of us have an opinion on this too. And some of us have been and survived business through the 80s and 90s. And had to pay for ourselves and pay for people who work for us. Through bad times, through double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates, nearly at 20%, and survived. And it is a question of survival, and this country will. We have 3 pillars that have held us back, and one of them is divided into 2. It has been our bank debt. The other half of that bank debt we need to work on immediately, and the government and Department of Finance and all those officials are on that diplomatic and every other method they can of engagement to try and secure debt. The ESM has to be fully established and funded before it can happen. The third part is personal debt, and I honestly do believe that we need to, as a government and as an Oireachtas, elected by the people, seek a better deal from and further engagement, more proactive engagement from the banks to make sure that we can deal with personal debt, because the domestic economy is depending on that. We have foreign direct investment. We're depending on exports. We've seen how fragile the whole agri-food sector can be because of a number of different factors that have caused what is going on now. In Ireland, at some stage, will be applauded, and the FSAI, the Department and the Minister's offices for having taken the actions they have, even though we were criticised at the start. So I think that's what we should be mindful of. And Deputy Feehan is absolutely correct. There are enough of times in here when the opposition can rightly take a pot at the government and rightly call them to heel. But on this occasion it would have been better to acknowledge that we have done what some people thought we couldn't do, and we should move on. because it's in all our interests. Thank you, Councillor.